for people who aren't in shape or, have underestimated the task, then they just can't, they just don't get the enjoyment out of it. And, in that case, you could just stay home and punish yourself for 11 hours, in whatever you got in your backyard.
Today, we're going to be talking about completing rim-to-rim hike in one day. So it's a highly discouraged practice by the Grand Canyon National Park, but it's not illegal. So if you're going to do it, you got to pay close attention to this guy we're talking to. His name is Will Burkhart. Okay, and there are many reasons why you should listen to his advice in the hiking domain. But for today's topic, his experience is extra special. So he's done rim to rim in one day, I think about 55 times or so, somewhere around there. Will, you want to?
Yeah, that's about right.
That's about right? Okay. But here's the deal. So Will has not just done it by himself, but with groups of people that he is responsible for getting out of the canyon successfully and safely. So it's much easier to complete a rim to rim hike when all you have to look out for yourself. But, he's done it over 50 times with a group. So that's impressive. And I should just say to the people listening, the maxim goes like this, and that is going in is optional and getting out is mandatory. And Will, I have confirmed, has gotten all of his hiking clients out safely. So that's good news. But I do want to, before I let Will speak, I do want to add some layers to his credibility as a guide that are well-deserved and worth noting. Okay, he served in the military as a Marine. He was a pioneer in the adventure racing space. He's guided for some of the top adventure travel companies in the world. He summited some of the most challenging high-altitude peaks, and he founded Badass Adventures. Okay, so before we get into rim-to-rim discussion, I just want to talk about kind of where you draw your experience from most when you're guiding people rim to rim or, anywhere else, really.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Marcus. Yeah, I've been at this since the mid 90s. And as you said, I started out in the adventure racing space, so it was a competitive environment. And, a lot of retired adventure racers will move into the guiding world. So, I draw a lot of experience from my military, combat experiences, my adventure racing experiences, and then, guiding for, professionally for other companies. And then, for about the last 10 years, my own company. And, it's not one, it's never one particular thing. It's just a body of knowledge that you only gain by doing it and then experiencing it and running into different situations where, things don't go quite as planned, and you've got to adapt and know how to manage the situation and take care of people and make sure that you put the odds of success in their favor. And a lot of times people who aren't as experienced, they don't, necessarily have the tricks that I have and the tools that I have to overcome adversity. And that's where I step in and help them deal with that adversity and get them out safely and hopefully have it be a positive experience.
Yeah, because it doesn't always go perfect, and most time it's not your fault. There are just people that just happens. They don't always come in physically prepared. Something's going on, and then you have to leverage all of your experience. I wasn't gonna get too much into it, but I just think it's interesting. Let's just very quickly talk about your adventure racing experience, and let's kind of relate it to your what you do as a guide, because basically adventure racing is, in some ways, it's guiding on steroids, because you are, it's a team effort. There are other people in your group that are obviously highly skilled. But I'd just like to hear a little bit about the adventure racing, and then just kind of, if you can, tie it in with guiding. If not, just a cool freaking story from adventure racing, if you want. It's up to you.
Yes, parallels. There's definitely some parallels, and the first, and you hit on it earlier, and I can't overemphasize, is preparation. Obviously, an adventure race is a competitive environment. I was generally on co-ed teams of 4 athletes. I was usually the team captain and the team navigator. But you only move as fast as your slowest person. So you really had to come together, know each other's skill sets, know how to support each other, and figure out the right combination ongoingly of, how can we maximize efficiency and how can we pool our resources so that everybody is in sync and moving as fast and as efficiently as we can in the right direction. Because you can be moving really fast, but if you're going in the wrong direction, then you're just getting off course that much faster. So there's those elements of really, a preparation of, working together as a group, communicating well, checking in to see how everybody's doing. If someone's struggling, figure out how to sort that out for them. The nice thing is it's a great training ground because of the competitive aspect of it, it just amps up the intensity level. And, you're going for, sometimes days with no sleep or days on very little sleep. Your nutrition, you're generally, I would get done with these races and be 10 pounds lighter. So you had a lot of different stressors that I was dealing with there. And, one story in particular that stands out is I was in the Discovery Channel adventure race, which is in New Zealand in the year 2000. It was a long time ago, but it was a pretty epic race. And there was a point late in the race where some weather was rolling in, and we were at a checkpoint. It was a hut basically out in the middle of the wilderness, nice and warm. They had folks there to support us, give us hot beverages and whatnot. And we knew kind of where we were at on the course and timing and everything. And we're like, all right, we got to keep moving. And the gal, who was managing this checkpoint told us before, hey, there's weather rolling in. If you want, you can just hang out and ride the storm out, so to speak. And we decided, no, we're gonna keep moving. So we kept at it. The idea, we knew the route. We basically had to climb up one valley onto a ridge and traverse a ridge and then drop down into another valley. And as we're climbing, the weather's starting to get a little bit nasty, but we were on the leeward side of the weather, so it was pretty calm until we reached the ridge. And once we reached the ridge, we got the full force of this storm, and it was literally like being in a snow globe. Just swirling winds, snow, very disorienting. And it was one of those moments where time slows down. You realize, okay, like, we really need to get this next decision right, because if we don't get it right, things could get really bad really fast. So my teammates and I hunker down, we figure out where we're at, where we need to go. And we thought we were going to go a certain way, but because of the conditions, we're like, no, that's just not going to work. So we adjusted on the fly. We decided, all right, we're going to drop down out of this weather on the other side of the ridge and traverse, below the, out of these conditions and just go in the same general direction, but pick a different line, which we ended up and did. And made it through the valley to just kind of a hut that didn't have anybody in it except some bunks. And we hunkered down for the rest of the night there. Unbeknownst to us, they had closed the race course down. They'd shut it down for weather, and we were the only team on the race course that they didn't have accounted for. So while we're doing our thing, the race organization was kind of freaking out. They're like, we've got a team out there that's not accounted for, bad weather. They assume the worst. Anyway, we wake up in the morning and come out of the hut to keep going, and within minutes a helicopter came down, landed, one of the race producers pops out, asks us, are we Team Explorer? We're like, yeah. They're like, hey, how you doing? We're like, oh, we're doing great. We're just gonna keep moving on. That was that. We didn't realize the kind of what was going on behind the scenes until it was televised on the Discovery Channel, and they laid it out for us what they were doing while we were out messing about in the bad weather. But had a happy ending. We finished the race, and that was that. But it's one of those things where, again, how does that correspond to guiding? And the main thing is you can have a plan, you can have a route, you can have an idea of what's going to happen, but you have to be able to adjust on the fly. And whenever you have a group in a relatively intense endeavor like the rim to rim Grand Canyon is, it's no small feat going 22 plus miles, dropping better part of 5,000 feet and gaining over a mile. Things can go wrong, and things can people can have issues, and you need to be able to adjust on the fly and draw on experiences like from that adventure race where you figure it out and you get everybody out safe.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. And I brought that up partly I want to establish some credibility here. And I think you've exceeded that mark. So I think people can establish your trustworthiness after that story. So let's kind of segue into getting in shape for rim to rim in a day. Now, as a caveat, I want people to understand that we're gonna kind of come from the perspective of rim to rim in a day, but so much of this can really be translated into just completing rim to rim. So I'm not excluding that. It's definitely worth listening to regardless. But I think for our discussion about getting fit, let's kind of filter it through a training philosophy that I call the Fit for Trips Big Five. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list them, and then I want you to comment on how they relate to getting in shape for this iconic hike. And people have listened to my stuff before, have heard this, but it's worth reiterating. So really, the 5 pillars are: 1, walk inclines; 2, walk stairs; 3, walk lunges; 4, walk far; and 5, HIIT training. And so just briefly, 1, walk inclines. Okay, we want to make sure you lengthen and strengthen your Achilles and calf. That could be treadmill, it could be hills, it could be hiking with inclines. They're not all created equal, but for this discussion, that's your options for inclines. Then there's stairs. Stairs have a very aggressive climb. Imagine the handrail on stairs. That's pretty steep. That's without the stairs. That's probably a scrambling kind of situation. Pretty aggressive going up the stairs, strength and endurance, and then you get that different kind of contraction called eccentric contraction or eccentric control going down the stairs. I'm sure we'll come back to that, Will. And then the third one, walking lunges, is really a catch-all term for just leg strength and things that kind of mimic hiking, maybe step-ups, walking lunges. There's some auxiliary type lifts and deadlifts and squats and things like that are also fine. Walking far is the fourth one. That's all relative. It depends on your departure date. Usually you walk further as you get closer to your departure date. And walking far in this case is you got to be able to cover, and I'm sure we'll get to it, specific distances, so 22 plus miles. And then HIIT training, which I'm not going to get into too much detail now. If it warrants us covering it, we'll get into that. But those are the 5, but I wanted to bring that up. And let's kind of come back around and talk about, which one of those, which do you think important? I think they're all important. I think it's good to diversify your training in most cases. But let's kind of come back to that and just give me your thoughts in general about getting in shape for rim to rim. And if you want to leverage some of those points, then you can, or just talk about it in your own way.
Yeah, no, I like all those points, Marcus. And I'll get back to it because I can't reiterate it enough. The best safety plan for the Grand Canyon is proper preparation. So that preparation piece is key. You know, an ounce of preparation is worth is a pound of cure, so to speak. And, people who aren't properly prepared, who underestimate it, they're the ones who suffer the most and present really a safety issue for the group. I tell people, I set a pace to complete the 22 plus miles in 11 hours. So it's really, we're covering 2 miles an hour, but when you factor in breaks and whatnot, you need to be able to move, 3+ miles an hour when you're moving. So there's that piece. And the reason I set that pace is you can only carry so much water and so much food, and water and food are your fuel. And if you take too long and you run out of either of those things, then you're in a real sandwich, so to speak. And so having that preparation is key. Obviously it's a hike. It's a hike that has some significant elevation loss and gain. So hiking is always the best. Hiking incline, to your point, going up and downhill is always going to be your number one choice if you got it. But your subs for that, stair climbing, step ups, going up and down stairs. Going down is as important as going up. Those are all critical. Leg strength, core strength, doing appropriately loaded work, because typically when you're doing a rim to rim in a day, you're carrying anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds on your back, which doesn't sound like a lot, but over a 11-hour period, it adds up. So definitely doing a lot of that stuff weighted is going to be good. And just really being, as fit as you can be, and the reason, besides safety, that I tell people to, make sure they're fit, follow a program like you have outlined, is it's going to also make the trip just that much more enjoyable. It's a beautiful place, the Grand Canyon. It's not one of the natural wonders of the world for no reason. And the more prepared you are, the more you're going to be able to enjoy it. And because it's just, it's breathtaking, and it's a very magical place. And, for people who aren't in shape or, have underestimated the task, then they just can't, they just don't get the enjoyment out of it. And, in that case, you could just stay home and punish yourself for 11 hours, in whatever you got in your backyard. So yeah, people are paying, they're paying good money for this. It's a once in a lifetime experience. And, that preparation is going to pay off from a safety standpoint and also an enjoyment standpoint. So can't overemphasize it enough.
Yeah. And you brought up a point earlier. You said, hey, if you can hike, then do that. But if not, you can do stairs and things like that. I was talking with somebody last week who's, into mountaineering, and, I brought up the point that, I often hear from, it's probably younger hikers who happen to live in the areas where there is mountainous terrain. And they'll say, all you got to do is just go hiking, and, just go hiking, throw on a heavy pack and just, hike. But, it's I don't think they mean it, but it's definitely discouraging if that's the only advice, somebody takes, because most people live in flat areas. A lot of people, live in urban areas. And if they have a traditional work schedule, then it's very unlikely they're going to get to hike during the week anyway. So right. I'm happy that you just reiterated, without even me bringing it up, that, you may not be able to hike, but you've got other things, and take advantage of them.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big, one thing adventure racing taught me was cross training, because, adventure racing, you're mountain biking, you're hiking, you're paddling, you're riding horses, you're rappelling. So you have to have a broad skill set. And when you add, like typically, when people ask me about training, A, I refer them to you, but B, I say, you really only need to hike a couple of times a week, if that. The vast majority of your training is going to be in those other domains of, okay, how can I get elevation in a gym or, in my, figure it out during my workday? How can I build leg strength, through lunges, squats, core strength, through whatever core work you want to do. And then, to round it out, that HIIT training is invaluable as well. And, what we're really creating here is we're creating resiliency across multiple training modalities and just ways to stimulate yourself physically. And that resiliency is key. And that's why, and even hiking with a heavy pack, it doesn't really translate to what we're doing in the canyon. We are, a heavy pack training is specific to that type of movement. We are doing that. We're moving fast, we're moving light. So, again, you want to have your training be very tailored and specific to the task at hand. And the more diverse it can be, the more targeted it can be, it just puts you in a lot better chance of success. So there are a lot of people out there who are like, oh yeah, just go do that, and you'll be fine. And I find that's not good advice. Talk to people who've done it. Come to folks like you, Marcus, who have really put a thoughtfully put together training program together. And don't think just because you've done this or done that you're ready. We get a lot of triathletes out there. We're like, oh, I can do an Ironman triathlon. This rim to rim is going to be nothing. And so they don't do really any specific training for that rim to rim event. And, they get their asses handed to them. It's not that they don't do it and they can't do it. They do, but it's usually a lot more painful than they anticipate. And the next day they're like, wow, I got my ass kicked. And if they had only respected it and realized, all that training they've done in their specific realm is helpful, but you need to tailor it to, again, what you're actually doing. And the more you can do that, the more success you're going to have, the more enjoyable it's going to be. So.
Okay, that's cool. Let's narrow the funnel here. Now let's talk about you and your training. Yeah. So let me give you kind of a hypothetical. And not everybody's going to be able to replicate this, and it's not the point. I mean, some people would just like to garner some things, from you. Hey, Will said it. This might be good. Keep in mind when you're listening to what Will says, if you have access to it, you can do it, great. If not, there are other ways to skin the cat. But Will, let's just say, for example, that you're not in peak shape, because as we both know, you can't be in peak shape all year round. It's not possible. It's not really healthy. So you do take times off, but let's just say you're gonna, guiding season is off, if there's such a thing. And you've got 12 weeks before season starts and you're about to, take a bunch of groups on rim to rim. Just kind of talk me through what you might do in it over a 12-week period, just kind of generally speaking.
Yeah, so the first thing I do is I tighten up my nutrition. Really focusing on the nutrition piece and make sure I'm not carrying extra body weight. So that's number one. I have a lifetime of experience at this, so my body is used to it. My central nervous system knows what it is. It's done it. It's, so when I'm actually doing the event, I'm exerting and my stress levels are much lower. So I'm just that much more efficient, having done it so many times and just being that comfortable with it. But regardless of that, and I'm in that preparation phase right now for some hikes in the middle of May. And so for me, I'll start to up my hiking volume and frequency because I have access to some good elevation right out my back door pretty much here in Phoenix. So I'll up my frequency of hiking, start to layer in some strength training, that sort of thing, some core work. I really focus on core work. And I'll incorporate the actual gear that I'm going to be using on the hike. So I'll wear the exact pack I'm going to have with the gear in it and all that. And what I'm trying to do is just replicate what I'm going to be doing. as closely as I can. And, I'm at the stage in my fitness journey where, I do what's called, my philosophy is minimum effective dose. But the reason I can follow that minimum effective dose philosophy is because I've done it so much. And I know exactly basically the minimum level of training that I need to safely do what I'm doing. And again, that comes over years of experience. So for most people, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that if you've never done anything like this. You really can't overtrain for this. And you obviously don't want to overtrain to the point where you're going to injure yourself. But for me personally, that's kind of what it looks like. Nutrition is the number one thing, and then upping the volume a bit to a comfortable level to where I'm, I'm ready. And that's across, hiking, strength training, core work. And then the one other thing I want to emphasize, Marcus, is, and you said, hike far or hike long. The reason you want to spend a significant amount of time on your feet is because it conditions your feet. And, if you haven't spent enough time on your feet will get punished, whether it's with blisters or just soreness. And, your feet are your wheels. So, I generally, as a rule of thumb for people, your longest hike should be anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of the length of the hike. So for a 22-mile hike, you're going to be wanting to hike, 14 to 18 miles. That should be your long hike. And, that should be, again, about 7 to 9 hours on your feet at one time is kind of the and it can be doing anything, but really being on your feet and being used to being on your feet. And this is a gear related thing, but I'm going to emphasize this as well, Marcus. Yep. I never enter the canyon without trekking poles. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that people use trekking poles. It really takes stress off your lower body and it engages strength from your upper body. The analogy I like to use is it's the difference between being in 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive. And it's one thing if you're on flat terrain to be in 2-wheel drive, but the Grand Canyon is not flat terrain and it's 4-wheel drive country. And those trekking poles are your 4-wheel drive system. So train with them. I've seen a lot of people, they pull out trekking poles that are not even out of the wrapper and then they don't know how to use them efficiently. Train with those poles. So there's that.
I could attest to the poles thing. We won't get into the story, Will, but so Will and I and some of my buddies, we went on a trip out into the Aspen area. And long story short, I had some gastrointestinal issues and my energy was really low. My appetite was low and it affected my ability. And I decided that I would try hiking poles because I just never did. And we've been on a lot of trips and we'll see me do it without hiking poles. But anyway, on this trip, I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to summit some of these things. Some of these mountains. We were going to try to hit the peak. So anyway, long story short, I got the poles and I used them and I was blown away how much it helped. It took so much stress off my quads. To go a little deeper, if I had my quads been working at maximally, my heart rate probably would have spiked way too much for the altitude we were at, and it would have been a huge problem. So my upper body took a lot of the weight off my lower body. Anyway, so I told Will, I was like, Will, that was unfreaking believable. And he just looked at me like, dude, I've been trying to tell you this. He said, more importantly, watch what I'm doing. Have you ever seen me not hike with poles? I'm like, no. He's like, just, okay. And there's a reason for that. And I was like, all right, I get it. So anyway, so yes, definitely use poles. Now I'll say, And I don't think you disagree with this. If you don't have any orthopedic issues, I think it's actually in some ways good to train to do some hikes without poles, get those quads really strong, get the lower body really working hard, and of course, train with poles too. And then, of course, use them 100% on your trip. So anyway.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah. So, and I also want to say that most people that are looking to do rim to rim, especially the people I've worked with, Will, you can corroborate this with some of the people who you've taken and you've screened. You know, a lot of people, they might lift once or twice a week, and they got some group fitness classes, you know, that they'll go to. So they're kind of in general fitness shape. And then, you know, a good 12 weeks of focusing on hiking centric training, like what we've been talking about today. So transitioning from just like general fitness group classes to more hiking specific stuff. Most people in a 12-week period, as long as you have that general fitness base, you're gonna be fine if within that 12-week period you're training properly and leveraging the things we've been talking about. Would you corroborate that, Will? What do you think? Any thoughts?
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree, Marcus. It's 12 weeks should be able to get it done. And again, you know, if you've got a targeted training plan that's well put together, you're going to be able to do it and not injure yourself. Because you do want to go into it not only fit, but you don't want to be dinged up. You want to be as healthy as you can, as close to 100% as you can, because the canyon requires it. So,
right. Yeah, but to also bring up something, you talked about how long you should hike for during your training. So what I do with my clients is set kind of weekly goals, kind of distance and elevation gain goals. And then what I'll do is I'll have them consolidate. Instead of doing it, try to get that distance throughout the week, consolidating it into 1 or 2 hikes. And so that's much less frequent. That's not something you're going to do every week, just to make sure people understand that that's something you do, you know, at different intervals in your training, not all the time. Anyway, I just wanted to just kind of clarify that for people listening.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to do it, Marcus. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like that approach.
So when someone is not in shape for rim to rim, what symptoms do you see most common? And at what point during the rim to rim trip do you notice it? So I know that, you know, you talk to your clients, and I don't care how good of a guide you are, it's just going to happen. People are going to come in, they're not going to be in proper shape. And I know you've seen it. So talk to me about symptoms and kind of at what point on the hike you notice it most.
Yeah, so the first thing that usually happens, because you go downhill first, people's quads and knees get pretty jacked pretty fast. So for people who haven't trained enough, their knees will definitely start barking at them. You know, their quads will get tight. And I always tell people the downhill is hard on the legs and easy on the lungs. The uphill is easy on the legs and hard on the lungs. So it's usually that downhill that people start to get some discomfort in those knees. And for that, the nice thing is once the downhill's over, that pain generally goes away. Once it's flatter and we're going uphill, but if people need to, take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like a Aleve or something along those lines, that usually will do the trick. Sometimes I'll have people take that before the hike just to help ease some of the pain in anticipation of it. But that's usually the first physical trouble people run into is pain in the knees and in the quads. After that, usually, especially if it's warmer out, we'll get issues with nausea and cramping. Those are 2 relatively common things for people who are struggling and they aren't quite in shape. Nausea is a very bad thing. It's like the worst thing, especially if you start to throw up. and can't keep food down, because then I can't give you food to give you fuel to get out. So whenever that comes up, we take that very seriously. I usually try to cool people down. Generally, your pace is going to slow as that happens, and they'll struggle keeping up. In those instances, I'll relieve them. The easiest thing I can do is relieve them of their pack, so lighten their load. That'll pick things up for them. But yeah, nausea and cramping are an issue. Going uphill, especially that last bit of, maybe last 4.5, 5 miles, the cardio system's getting definitely taxed. And, people who aren't in shape, we basically have to rework the break schedule. So, they'll go for shorter durations, maybe 10, 15 minutes and stop for a minute or two. So we'll adjust how that works to basically give their cardiovascular system a chance to recover, their legs a little chance to recover. And so those are the big things for people who are, like out of shape. Those are typically the most common things I see. Blisters as well. For people who haven't spent enough time on their feet and properly conditioned their feet, blisters can be an issue. And I'll be honest, Marcus, generally that's as bad as it gets with me. I'm usually able, as long as we're all communicating effectively, which generally happens, I'm able to catch things early and keep them from escalating to a heat exhaustion or a heat stroke type situation. And
Yeah, that's, I think for you clarifying that, I think that's a good sign of that's a good guide. Somebody who's going to take good care of you and mitigate some of these issues before they even happen. So that's a good time. Let's just segue into fueling for rim to rim, because the uniqueness of the downhill start can feel easy and kind of lull you into feeling like you don't have to strategically snack or eat. And so then you're at more risk for bonking. So why don't you just comment on that?
Yeah, so obviously the downhill, it's early in the day, it's cool. Your cardio system isn't burning, isn't being taxed a whole lot. You have a full stomach, usually from breakfast or the dinner the night before. So you're well fueled starting out. Ideally, you're well fueled, well hydrated. And I like to tell people you want to try to get anywhere from 200 to 400 calories in an hour. 200 is usually doable for most people. And do that from the beginning. You don't want to wait until you're hungry. You want to stay in front of your hunger, because you will always burn more calories than you can consume generally. So you're going to be calorie deficient anyway. So you want to get ahead of that and do it from the start. I typically like to, when I'm guiding groups, we generally will stop every hour to hour and a half. And it's during those breaks, whether it's to use a bathroom or whatever, to get that fuel in. And same way with water, you drink before you're thirsty. So, just sip on that water. You don't want to bloat yourself and get too crazy, but you definitely want to get the fluids in. I like a mix of water and electrolyte drinks. So typically people don't like to put electrolytes in a water bladder. So I'll say, all right, put a liter of water in your bladder and have a water bottle or two of different electrolyte solutions. So you kind of mix it up. To go hand in hand with training, Marcus, during the training, you want to train with the nutrition that you're going to be using during the hike. So your nutrition plan and execution needs to be tested especially during those long training hikes. So the more people, they experiment with different things. It's another reason I don't provide snacks. I want people to eat during their training what they're going to eat on the hike. So whether that's gels, whether it's the gummies, nuts, trail mix, bars, liquid type stuff, liquid meal replacement type stuff. Some people prefer real food, sandwiches, chips, fruit, whatever it is, make sure you've trained it so that you know that you can move and maintain a high level of exertion while taking in calories.
Yeah.
If you follow those rules of thumb, you will generally not bulk. If you don't, if you get behind in your nutrition, it's really hard to make it up. It's not impossible, but it's hard. And that gets back to my enjoyment piece. If you want to enjoy it, you have a maximally good time, then learn how to eat and move and drink and move.
Yeah. Yeah. When we did it, I liked the bars on the way down. I enjoyed having a sandwich and a good meal, sandwich and chips. I can't remember exactly where we stopped. What was the name of it? It was there was like a creek there.
Yeah, we stopped at Cottonwood Campground for lunch.
Okay, so we stopped there and I enjoyed it. But then on the ascending portion, I really liked a very low protein bars, or very low protein, a very high carb for the ascent. Anyway, that was just me personally. Any thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, and that, and you bring up some good points there, Marcus. There were different times in the hike where you felt like different foods. So having variety is pretty key. And not only variety, but stuff that is going to be, that sounds good. If you don't have, if what you're bringing doesn't sound like you want to eat it, then you're not going to eat as much. So definitely, pick your nutrition according to what you'll eat. And, don't look at it. I mean, obviously look at it from a nutritional standpoint, but you'd be amazed at what I used to eat adventure racing. I mean, it was just, potato chips, candy, whatever, right? It was calories.
Right.
Now, at least a little bit more now, but the one thing I learned is it had to be something that I would want to eat. Like it sounded good, because otherwise you won't, especially if your stomach gets a little sideways. And so those are some pretty key points there around that. And so variety, stuff you'll eat, and and knowing that at different times of the hike, you'll probably feel like eating different things.
Yeah.
And the last point I want to make about eating is I've had a handful of clients who are big keto people. They're big proponents of the keto diet, and the keto diet's great. It has a lot of benefits, but you don't want to try to do the Grand Canyon on a keto, just eating keto. Even keto athletes who train keto and do it a lot, during races, during competitive events, they'll use carbs, because carbs are like jet fuel, and their body will pick those carbs up, and they'll be like moving fast. So, it's a common misunderstanding, for a lot of keto people. Oh, I'm on a keto diet, and to your point, toward the end of the hike, what your body was craving was carbs, and it really wasn't your body; it was your brain. Your brain takes, it needs a lot of carbohydrate, and you want to be thinking as clearly as possible. And the way to do that, at least at that point, doing that event, carbs are going to do it. You're not going to get a carb fog. Your brain's going to be like, give me some of that. So that's just something I've had some keto folks try to do some of these things just with keto, and it doesn't always go well. Like they suffer, and they're reluctant to take goos and all that, but I'll give them that, and it's amazing, because within minutes the lights go back on, like they're back, and they're able to move. They're able to keep moving much more efficiently.
Yeah, I put out an email a couple weeks ago, and it was highlighting an article on the fitfortrips.com website about bonking that you and I kind of collaborated on. Yeah, and she sent an email back to me, kind of a scathing email, how that this nutritional advice for aggressive hikes, or is going to give somebody like a diabetic coma. Like, she couldn't believe it, and I didn't respond back. And in my mind, I was like, okay, give it a shot. Try keto. Give it a go, and see how you feel. So I think you just pointed out why that's an issue. So anyway.
Yeah, and
Okay,
again,
cool.
it's what works for you, right? That's why I don't really give a whole lot of nutrition advice specifically, like what to eat and all that. Yeah, I'll give parameters, but you know your body the best, and you know what works. And again, there's the theoretical world of nutrition, and then there's the real world. And the real world at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, or when you're trying to hike out of the Grand Canyon, sometimes theory and reality don't match. So you need to have the flexibility, people who are just so adamant about it and so fixed in their ways. It's like, hey, like you can be right and adamant and you can also die. So, would you rather admit that you were wrong and like take what you need to survive, or be right and die? So that's your choice. Just don't do that when I'm guiding you, because I've never had anybody die and I don't want to have anybody die. Because that's just a lot of paperwork and a lot of headache and
that darn paperwork.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing to make clear is, and you said it earlier, this is nutrition for the hike and nutrition for your training hikes. It's not what you eat all the time. And most people don't eat bars throughout the day anyway. That's kind of a hiking thing. Anyway. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about kind of what the corridor strategy you would choose, like whether you'd go north to south or vice versa, or Bright Angel versus South Kaibab. Would you base it on fitness, season, both, neither? And let's kind of weave in a little discussion about distance and elevation gain, and then we can start to wrap up.
Yeah, so obviously, the two choices are going north to south, south to north. I'll be honest, for the majority of my early on rim to rims, I was always north to south. And the advantages to north to south are when you go down the north rim, you're dropping about 5,600 feet. And when you're climbing out the south rim, you're gaining about 4,600. So you have to climb about 1,000 less feet going that direction. The trade-off is if you go out Bright Angel Trail, you're adding a little over 2 miles to the hike. So you've got that distance trade-off. The reason most people take Bright Angel is because it has water on it. The last 4.5 miles has water every 1.5 miles. So you don't have to carry as much water. You've got that cushion there and that support. Going out South Kaibab, you don't have water. So that means you're carrying more water from the bottom, and you're hoping that you've calculated right. And so your margin of error is just a lot slimmer, at least going out South Kaibab, which people rarely do. I've done it a handful of times under the right conditions, but the conditions have to be right. Within the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing more. My preferred route is going south to north. And when I go south to north, I always go down South Kaibab, again, to save on the distance. And at the beginning of the hike, when it's really cool out, you can carry less water because it's cool and you're going downhill over a shorter distance. And there's no water on it, but you're fresh. So dropping down that side, going south to north, I can generally get people to the bottom in under 3 hours. So it's a pretty efficient way to get down to the bottom. It's the most efficient way. And then that 1,000 feet of extra gain from going south to north, that extra 1,000 feet is accounted for in about 7 miles. So 1,000 feet over 7 miles is actually relatively flat. It's not that aggressive. So even though you are gaining an extra 1,000, it's over a relatively flat, surface, relatively speaking. So the impact of that isn't as significant. And the other consideration, the reason I like south to north is there's a spot in the canyon called the box. And the box basically starts about 1.5 miles north of Phantom Ranch. So if you're coming down the south rim and across, you're going to hit the box at about 8.5 miles in. Versus going north to south, you're going to hit the box at about 11 miles in, 12 miles in. And from a timing standpoint, you want to get through the box as early as you can because that's the hottest part of the canyon. So I like to get through that, A, as early as we can, and B, when people are as fresh as they can. Because I know we've dodged an area that if you get stuck in at the wrong time, you can really have some problems if you don't know how to manage heat correctly. And typically people who have heat issues in the canyon, that's where it's going to happen. And that's where people will, die of heat stroke. So I personally think it's just a prettier hike. I think coming out on the North Rim it's just a prettier way to end the hike. I think that way the exit from the canyon on the North Rim is easier than the exit on the South Rim. The last bit of hiking isn't as aggressive as it is on the South Rim. And I just had more success with it, to be honest, Marcus. People tend to move faster and run into less issues. So that's my preferred way.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's cover two more things. So I want to talk a little bit about trail conditions, but so when we went together, so we did the South Kaibab. So when we were together, we were heading down South Kaibab. Okay, I was in the rear of the group, and I noticed that the three other guys, my three buddies that were in front, they were occasionally kind of losing traction and slipping a little. And I kept jabbing them and kind of making fun of them because I wasn't having any trouble. I felt very sure-footed and confident. My feet never slipped. And when I compared my shoes to the other guys, I noticed that the lugs on the bottom, and I was wearing trail running shoes, the lugs were much longer. So the shoes that I wore were Hoka Evo Jaws. Okay, I don't think they make them anymore. I think you can still find them online. And my toe ended up wearing out the front, so they're not durable. But my experience with the lugs were, I think, a good anecdote for people to think about. On the website, it defines the sole as Vibram Mega Grip High Traction outsole with 6 millimeter lugs. So if you want to just talk about that real quick, I don't think people get in the weeds on that, but just because I've experienced it, I bring it up. We can comment on it or move on. Because it was kind of dry conditions, and so it was a little more, slippery. Maybe it's like that year round. So anyway, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple of points on that. Going down South Kaibab or even Bright Angel, those are trails that are used by the mules. So the trails are beat up a little bit more because of mule traffic. So the conditions can be a little trickier. So that's one thing. The second thing is you're going to want to train, you're going to want to do the hike in whatever shoe you train in. So make sure that whatever shoe you train in, you're comfortable with it. It gives you good traction, and your feet don't blister in it. And then the other thing, Marcus, is it could have been a technique issue. A technique issue, and B, I think your buddies, at least two of them, were from Florida. So
Miami,
they didn't
correct.
have necessarily the hiking training conditions that you might have had. So they were just, I think, maybe a little bit less comfortable in that terrain. And so their technique might not have been as good. And when I say technique, the tendency for people is when they're going downhill, they're afraid they're going to fall on their face. So they lean back and they get their weight in their heels, and then their feet slip out from under them and they land on their butt. So from a technique standpoint, and you want to train this, is you want to lean forward. You want to be on the balls of your feet. Have nose over toes is what I like to tell people. And so that's probably going to be more of a factor in traction, is really technique of staying forward, leaning forward, using your poles. And there's people who do this hike, not necessarily clients, but I know guide friends of mine. They do them in Teva hiking sandals, and I've seen all kinds. There's some people out there who do barefoot. So there is the technology of the soles that it can be helpful. But it's what you're comfortable with, what you've trained with, and are you using the right technique? Those are going to be the top three considerations.
All right, that makes a good point. I don't want to brush over the fact that these were Miami boys. Okay, so anybody listening to this, it doesn't get much flatter than Miami. So if you are concerned that you live in a flat area, it is not. It's still the Grand Canyon rim to rim is still something you should consider with the right training. So I don't want to brush that over because that's important to hear. All right, last thing. So let's cover kind of two things at once. So generally speaking, I know there are always optimal times to go on certain hikes, but different times give you different experiences. So rather than saying one's better than the other, just generally speaking, talk about what it's like at different seasons if you want to go there. But and then I want to talk about dates personally that you have available, because I want this to be kind of an evergreen episode. Yeah, we're going to talk about what dates you have available, but let's also talk about just this season, just in general, like what people experience in May versus October and in between.
Yeah, so they don't open the North Rim until May 15th. So the earliest you can do rim to rims in the spring is from May 15th on. By the middle of May, things are warmer at the bottom of the canyon, and it's so you just plan accordingly, right? But you start earlier and you try to mitigate the heat as much as you can. But I think you and I did it in the first week in June, Marcus, if my memory serves me correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so the heat is definitely going to be more of a factor early in the season. But knowing that, starting earlier, making sure you're well hydrated, bringing, like spray mister bottles and stuff, that helps with that. But heat's definitely more of a factor then. I do a hike on the summer solstice on June 21st, and we start at 6 p.m. at night, and we hike across the canyon in the middle of the night on the shortest night of the year. It's a beautiful hike, and the desert comes alive at night, and it's not all in the dark. You're basically, but anyway, that's kind of a unique event. But I think for people who want to maximize the odds in their favor of success, October is probably your best bet. And even though the North Rim lodging closes on October 15th, the park room access to the park remains open through the end of October into November. Part of it's dependent on the snowfall. They stop plowing the road after the second major snowfall, but I really like hiking, those last 2 weeks in October because the weather's not a factor. It's cool. The day's a little bit shorter, but it's just a beautiful time of year. You've got the fall foliage on the North Rim. You start doing it after October 15th and the crowds diminish quite a bit. So, most people are trying to get it done before October 15th, so it tends to be more crowded. So yeah, that's probably the time of year that I prefer it the most. As far as dates go, like this year I've got a trip that's already full, May 2nd, 3rd, or May 17th, 18th, and 19th. I do have an open weekend before that, May 8th, 9th, and 10th, or 9th, 10th, and 11th. And then October, similarly, I already have a trip that's mostly full. The first weekend in October, the 3rd through the 5th. And then the 24th through the 26th, I have another one scheduled that's not full. And then same with the 17th through the 8th, 19th, and then October 31st through November 2nd. So I usually do these things. People fly in on a Thursday, we hike it on a Friday, and then we come back on a Saturday. From a timing standpoint with traffic and crowds, that's usually the way to do it that I found best. But, I think Marcus, and we'll let your audience know, my company does custom trips for folks. So if you have custom dates with certain number of folks, that's our bread and butter, is really tailoring the trip to your group and making it work. So.
Yeah, and I think after this episode, I think people can understand why you call it Badass Adventures. I think that name is, for you in particular, good. There are great guides out there, and there are badass guides, and Will is a badass guide. So he does other things besides rim to rim. And if you guys have rim to rim on your bucket list, I encourage you to hire Will. If you want to go do it on your own, fine. But just keep in mind that it's life's too short. So if you're concerned about navigation, then all you have to do is train, get the right gear, and with Will, you're going to be successful. And if you need to get in shape, give me a shout at fitfortrips.com. Will, do you want to go ahead and just kind of give your coordinates, whether it's social media or just your website, whatever you want to do?
Yeah, website's usually going to be the best way to get a hold of me. Badass Adventures at badass-adventures.com. That's my website. Reach out through email. You can also shoot me a text at 928-274-2424. If you text me first and just let me know, then I'll know you're not a spam caller. And I usually get back to folks, within a couple of days, as long as I'm not out on a trip. And love to, talk to people, plan trips for them. Yeah, it's one of my favorite trips. It's definitely once in a lifetime. And to your point, Marcus, I do more than just this one. Cactus to Clouds is another big hike that a lot of people, that's a pretty daunting one, all through the Southwest, Colorado, Montana. We have a trip planned to Tanzania, a couple of trips planned in Tanzania this year to climb Kili and do safari and that sort of thing. Do trips to Nepal, down in South America. So it's have a lot of fun, a lot of adventure, Marcus. And I appreciate you and this opportunity. Connect.
Yeah, man, I enjoyed it. That was some great information. So, okay, my friend, this won't be the last time we talk. I will be in touch soon. Okay, my friend. Okay. We'll talk soon.
Take care, Marcus.
That concludes this episode of the Hike Strong podcast. I'm committed to keeping all of the episodes for free. All I ask is that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. My goal is to build a vast community of hikers with the confidence to crush any local or global trail. I hope you will join me in this endeavor. So until next time, train, hike, repeat, and as always, I'm here to support you every step of the way.